Mark your calendar for Earth Day, which is Thursday, April 22nd. That's when we'll hold our second meeting, but it will continue this discussion to try to find solutions to clean up the Georgia shoreline. I wanted to start with a few housekeeping items that we just need to discuss before we proceed. The first is that this presentation is being recorded, and we'll assume that if you stay on that you are agreeing to be recorded. We need to do this so we can follow up with any questions or concerns you may have. And we'd also like to put this on the FNLC website for people that weren't able to attend tonight and would like to be able to get caught up. The second thing is that during the talk, you are muted. And so we would ask you, as your questions come up, to please enter them in the chat so we can recognize you at the end of the presentation. Or you can simply write your questions down and raise your hand at the end of the presentation, and we'll call on you after we've addressed the questions that are in the chat.
And if I may just say one thing, it's actually the Q&A is the appropriate spot. If you have questions, you can enter it in the Q&A.
Thanks, Andreas.
Yep.
So I always like to start a presentation, start our hour by telling people what I'm going to tell you. And let me just quickly run through the agenda for this evening. We expect to spend an hour together, and this presentation won't take an hour, but we just would like you to know what we're trying to accomplish tonight. First, I'd like to take a minute to tell you about the Friends of Northern Lake Champlain and how we procured this study in 30% design grant. I'll briefly describe the problems that we're seeing on Lake Champlain's shoreline. Then we'll tell you what we're trying to do about it. Watershed Consulting Associates will show you their topographical findings and how they lead us to finding problem areas to address. Best management practices will be described to show how the landscape can be improved. We will describe who benefits from this work. Then we'll answer some questions. Are there risks to undertaking these projects? How much will the new practices cost? And how long will it take to implement them? How will our success be measured? And finally, we want to hear your questions and comments and make plans for our next meeting. So again, as we go through the presentation, we would appreciate it if you would put your questions in the chat or write them down, and we will be sure to address them at the end of the presentation. At this point, I'd like to invite Carrie Garvey to describe the purpose of the project.
Great, thanks, Kent. As Kent mentioned, this is the first of our 2 public outreach meetings. And in the top right corner, there's a little more information about that second meeting. And in that meeting, we're going to talk more about specific areas that we're going to be looking at and some of the practices that are recommended. So you can register for that second meeting at any time before that April 22nd meeting. And the URL is up there, tinyurl/Georgia Stormwater 2. So just like you registered for this meeting, it's the same setup. So just to get a little more information about what we're going to be talking about. So we're going to give an overview of this really exciting project, and it's in progress right now. And again, it's a focus on the Georgia shoreline area. And we want to let everyone know about what's been done so far and what's going to happen, and have some discussion at the end. And the ultimate goal of this project is really to identify areas where best management practices, or BMPs, could be put into place to reduce the pollutant discharges to Lake Champlain. And as you probably know, adding pollutants to Lake Champlain degrade water quality, and they really do feed these blue-green algae blooms, which maybe you've heard of as cyanobacteria. And these photos off to the right of this slide show a few examples of some of these algae blooms that have happened in recent years. So obviously not only is this a really unattractive thing, it can also, pose some pretty serious hazards. So Kent gave a brief overview, but just to let you know a little bit more about who we are in the whole team. So again, I'm from Watershed Consulting, and as is Andres here with us today. And our company is based in Burlington, and we're an environmental consulting company. And you know, our real focus is in stormwater management, and protecting water quality is the goal. So our company was hired by Friends of Northern Lake Champlain to complete this project. And this project was funded by the Lake Champlain Basin Program and a grant from them. And that was acquired by the Friends of Northern Lake Champlain. So I'll let Kent introduce that side of the team.
Okay, well, thanks. For the past 19 years, the Friends of Northern Lake Champlain has been working to reduce blue-green algal blooms in the northern arm of Lake Champlain by reducing non-point source surface runoff into the state's waterways. Our board of directors represents lakeshore residents, local business folks and farmers, legislators, and municipal employees. Directors from the town of Georgia include Senator Carolyn Brannigan, former select board member Paul Jansen, and myself. Slide. Before COVID, you may have participated or been invited to our public outreach programs like the annual Run or Walk for the Lake event that's held at the Peter and Francis Millette Georgetown Beach. And it's been 6 or 7 years, but since we had a pig roast, and we had a few pig roasts that were held at the town beach and did educational outreach at that time. Our advocacy work was influential in 2015 with the passage of the State of Vermont Clean Water Act, and in 2019 with the passage of legislation to establish a long-term clean water fund. If COVID recovery continues at its present pace, we hope to restart our collaboration with the St. Albans Museum and other local watershed groups to present lake lessons to area 4th graders, including GEMS students, as are depicted in the slide. FNLC's advocacy work is backed up by the actual work that we're doing on the ground. When we talk to legislators and agency personnel, they are more likely to listen because we have actual hands-on experience with construction projects and new practices. The state adopted the all-in slogan that FNLC promoted at a half-day presentation in the Well of the House of Representatives to bring attention to the lake's condition in 2015, which led to the passage of the Clean Water Act. Over the past decade, FNLC has participated in nearly 70 demonstration construction projects and practices that has leveraged thousands of dollars of federal and state grant funds to towns, farms, schools, and private landowners. Pictured in this photo is Cassie Carpio, who was our AmeriCorps volunteer that worked with us for 2 years and created the map with the projects on it. And then our other great staff person is Pat Donay. He's our project coordinator. Last year, the two of them worked and constructed a series of rain barrels at the Georgia school, the elementary school, and helped with the construction of a gravel wetland that's parked at the back of the parking lot at Interstate Auto, which is at the head of the impaired Deerbrook Gully. In the fall of 2019, we were led to the intersection of Mill River Road and Georgia Shore Road to investigate a discharge, and recalled that the Georgia Shore Road had been left out of the Town of Georgia Stormwater Management Plan, which FNLC and Stone Environmental provided in 2012 to the Town of Georgia. Subsequently, FNLC applied to the Lake Champlain Basin Program for an enhanced BMP grant and was awarded $25,846 in November 2019, so to study the shoreline and stormwater erosion and come up with 3 or more 30% design projects. Tonight, Watershed Consulting will explain the progress that has been made on the assessment, and we'll be asking for your input. Blue-green algal blooms are depicted in this slide. These were experienced in St. Albans Bay. I'm sure that many of you will recall the substandard conditions of our bay last summer as the lake levels approached another low-level record. This photo was taken on a boat tour in 2014. Thankfully, we have not seen such a drastic blue-green algal bloom overgrowth since then, but Lake Champlain Committee volunteer algal trackers have constantly reported algal blooms at the town beach boat launch area. The town has issued do not swim warnings often. During our discussion with town officials and residents, we were made aware of a strong offensive odor problem that could have been noticed when driving along Georgia Shore Road just this last summer when the lake had receded to such a low level. So at this point, I'd like to turn back over to Carrie to describe the work that WCA has done.
Great, thank you. So our work really started trying to take a really broad view of the whole area, since it is quite a large area with quite a lot of shoreline. And so the way that we did this is we used available spatial data sources, and these data layers were incorporated into our analysis, and we took that data and clipped it to a 250-foot buffer zone along the lakeshore to really focus in on that area specifically. And the data that we used included stream buffers, the soils, the slope, which is, how steep the land is, and the types of land use and land cover that were mapped in that buffer zone. And each one of those different factors was scored based on really well understood relationships to water quality. And so the factors that have been linked to poorer water quality were scored higher. So then what we did was we used a hotspot analysis, and that tool was used to identify statistically significant clusters of low values and high values. And that was used to translate all of these layers into a mapping along the whole shoreline that identified water quality risk zones. So you see in that map that just popped up, the red are the high risk, the green are the low risk, and the yellow is the moderate risk. And so that really allowed us to target our field assessments because it's just very challenging to go out and look at every square inch of that whole area. So we wanted to use our time and resources to really go after those areas that are likely to cause the most issues in the lake. And we did, after we did those initial field assessments, we did refine these areas somewhat because, of course, seeing things on the ground, you can definitely see more than you can with this larger scale assessment that can be done using this spatial data. So we now have this classification for the entirety of the shoreline, and this can be used both in this project and in the future to target more projects and more areas that are in need of mitigation. So we use these water quality risk zones to guide our field assessments. And last summer and fall, we went out and looked at the shoreline from a kayak. We flew a drone in select areas where we really couldn't access it mostly due to really high waves when we were out there, lots of wind. And we also drove around, especially on Georgia Shore Road, and walked around on foot. And of course, all of these assessments were done, on public areas, no traversing into private property or anything like that. So we collected information about each area that was a potential problem site or an area that may have been a good opportunity for stormwater or lakeshore management. And we took photos, collected data about any risk factors that we saw, like erosion, lack of vegetated buffer, or exposed soil. And these are just a couple example photos of some of the erosion issues that we saw along the shoreline. So after all of these assessments, we ended up doing 25 site assessments where some of those best management practices could possibly be located. We identified 44 areas where vegetated buffers or low or no mow zones could be located, and completed 34 shoreline assessments along the shoreline. And the photo shown here is one of the drone collected photos that we took. Of course, you probably recognize the Georgia Shore beach there. I'm going to turn it back over to Kent to talk about some of the project drivers.
Okay, thanks, Carrie. As you can see in this slide, excessive sediment has been carried downstream from an upland area that is not practicing best management practices to infiltrate excess stormwater and reduce storm erosion. Ultimately, mistakes in upland practices always wind up in the lake or on downstream properties. As our environment and lake deal with the challenges of our changing climate, we're seeing a cycle of drought, sudden record rain events, and more freeze-thaw winter events that are bringing more stormwater discharges and sediment into our bay. What is outside the scope, while this is outside of the scope and capacity of our analysis to deal with causes of climate change, we realize that we're going to have to improve our infrastructure to deal with its effects on our landscape. Next. It would be irresponsible for FNLC to point out these problems and not to follow up with solutions. We are not known as a group of finger pointers that only want to raise a ruckus, dump additional workload and financial demands on municipalities. We've done work to find the highest priority areas that are contributing to sediment and phosphorus runoff, and we're following up by providing 30% design on at least 3 problem areas in the town's right of way to reduce loading into Lake Champlain. And let me emphasize that again, this work would be done in the town's right of way and not on private properties. The town can use our designs to apply for final design and construction grants in the future. At their own time pace. The town administrator and select board are well equipped in grant writing, and FNLC, of course, will remain available to lend assistance as project work is adopted. As Vermont and our secretary, Julie Moore, has put it to me several times, reducing phosphorus loading into Lake Champlain is a 10,000-piece puzzle. Friends of Northern Lake Champlain realizes that volunteer watershed groups and municipalities cannot solve this problem alone, so we are trying to demonstrate effective projects that will show others how to participate. We're trying to start an effort where we can invite people that have an interest to work on this problem. Next. So who will benefit from this analysis? Since a large percentage of the shoreline is privately held, are we just doing this to benefit some high-value residential properties on the lake shore? Or are we doing this to protect a high taxable property base for the town? No, we're not doing that. We want to preserve this treasure as a legacy to the next generation of Georgia residents who use this lake for drinking water, recreation, fishing, and other practices. Everyone that rides a vehicle in our back roads, uses a private toilet or septic system, maintains a lawn, eats food grown on our agricultural soils, everybody is making a variable level of contribution to phosphorus runoff. Working on this project will provide a small contribution in reducing the output into the lake.
So I'm going
And
to talk
now, yeah, now I'm going back to Carrie. Sorry.
No, that's fine. So as Kent just mentioned, under this project, we are going to be completing preliminary designs for 3 sites. And those 3 sites are all going to be on town property, including the Georgia Shore Road right-of-way. And just to give you an idea of what that means is basically we'll be looking at those sites and designing a best management practice that would work for that particular site and help reduce that those pollutants that are going to the lake currently. And in the case where the practices are going to be in the Georgia Shore Road right-of-way, we want to involve adjoining property owners in the design process to make sure that those people who would be seeing those practices on a daily basis understand what they are and are on board with the functionality of the site and the aesthetics of the practice. So we don't want to make a plan and construct something that someone who's going to have it next to their property wouldn't be happy with. We'd definitely welcome an opportunity to work with adjoining property owners to complete a project with mutually agreed upon benefits. So before any practice is constructed, there's going to need to be some additional site investigations. So that would include looking at the soils and determining what those soils are made up of and whether water could be infiltrated or if it needs to be designed in such a way that the water can safely pass through the system. And there's also going to need to be a survey for the topography of the site and to understand the existing infrastructure like culverts and swales, for example. So just to give an idea of the cost and timeline for these designs and the future work. So as we mentioned, this project that we're talking about was funded through a Lake Champlain Basin Program grant that was about $25,000. And so there's no cost to any of the Georgia taxpayers or anything like that to conduct these assessments and develop these preliminary designs. That's all within that Lake Champlain Basin Program grant. As the select board decides to move ahead with any of the identified projects, the town administrator and friends of Northern Lake Champlain or other watershed groups can continue to work together to procure additional grant funding. So for the 3 projects where we're going to be doing these preliminary designs, this puts that work in good standing to receive those additional grant funding opportunities for final design and then for construction of the practices. However, these grant timelines are not very short. It does take time to get these things done. And so there wouldn't be any work done this year, 2021. And usually the timeline for projects like this would be more like optimistically the summer or fall of 2022, but more likely 2023. And I just have here an example of an installed stormwater treatment feature. So this one is a swale feature that has some nice vegetation planted in there, some nice wildflowers. So it's just an example of what one of these practices could look like. And I'll turn it back over to Kent.
Okay. So how will we measure the success of this project? As you've heard repeatedly, land use by our European forebears with forestry and agricultural practices from the old country started 400 years ago. So our generation is being asked to correct 4 centuries of problems that were caused by practices whose environmental effects were unknown to many generations of Vermonters. By reducing sediment and phosphorus loading, we will learn to maintain their sustainable balance, and we'll be a long way, but we are now a long way from achieving our goals. We will not actually see improvement in our water conditions for a long time, but it is time to get started. Unlike traditional FNLC water monitoring practices where we grab collection bottles like those that we've depicted in this picture, our project does not contain a water monitoring component. You will not see us down grabbing water samples on the Georgia shore. But so our impact on reducing P load will have to be explained on formulas that are provided by Vermont ANR and the assistance of the environmental engineers. So that concludes the presentation for tonight. I want to thank you for saving your questions and comments, and we can start addressing them. I would just like to add that in anticipation of this program, when the postcard went out, I actually had a call from someone that lives on Georgia Shore Road that I know very well. And they had questions about what we were going to do, and we were able to, we set up for me to go down to visit the site and talk to them, and I will bring, the in-depth study down to them so they can look at it. And I'm most willing to do that. I mean, our name's in the phone book. I don't know if I want to give it out here, but you can contact me by my email address that's on this slide, khenderson@friendsofnorthernlakechamplain.org. I apologize for that long address. My project coordinator and I struggle with that all the time, but you're very welcome to contact me, and I'd be really happy to go down and walk the property with you and, really give you a private showing of what we've got to look at if you're interested. As far as the question and answer, Andreas, can you lead us through that through the chat?
Definitely. So a couple of questions came through. The first question is, are there any plans to address the silt buildup coming out of the Mill River? The silt is causing a lack of circulation, which promotes algae. And so I'll just throw in my 2 cents, and then you guys feel free to add. But, we understand the Mill River is a focus area, and actually the assessment that we've done so far confirms that, which is great because it shows that the work that we're doing so far is pointing us to known problem areas already. And, our work is focused on the Georgia Shore specifically. So we're really not working up in the upland areas of the watershed, including the upper areas in the Millbrook watershed. However, one of our priority projects, which we've identified so far, would have a direct benefit to mitigating the sediment coming into the Mill River. So I think coming out of our project is going to be something that will help that issue. And just one thing quickly, just to mention too, it's a big problem, and Kent, I think, did a good job kind of laying out the foundation of how this problem has kind of been developing over generations. And really, this is kind of the first step, and we're not going to be, trying to say that we're going to be solving all the issues through this study, but this is really kind of the first step in laying out a process to kind of get a track going where we can start understanding where the problems are, and then start applying the solutions in a very deliberate, manner. So anything to add on that question, guys? A couple other ones popped in.
The only thing I would add is the work of the Friends. I said it quickly, but our aim has been to stop the surface runoff that is adding to the phosphorus load in the lake. And when I started to learn about these problems, I was concerned about, well, why can't we just treat the lake? Because there are substances you could put in the lake that could tie up the phosphorus, and then you could go in and dredge it. That may be what this question's talking about, is why don't we just remove that sediment and clear things out? And I can tell you that that is, first, that would take almost an act of Congress, but it takes working with the Army Corps of Engineers to undertake a project like that. I can tell you that there is something underway in another part of St. Albans Bay, but it's been an 8-year project getting to that point. And that's not in the scope of what we're doing. What we're talking about is what's adding, what is adding, and how can we slow it down?
Great. So the next question we have is, do you have programs for landowners by the lake to learn or implement how to maintain water runoff?
That is a great question, and I'm really, really pleased that question came up. And yes, Friends is really looking for opportunities. And when COVID lets up, we really wanted to have a picnic at the town beach to explain this project. And if we can identify a group of concerned residents on the Georgia Shore, we would be very happy to partner with the Lakewise program, and we can bring resources. And I know that Northwest Regional Planning would work with us, and an outreach program like that could be organized very well. That's right in our wheelhouse, and I'd really like to take advantage of that. I'm not looking at the chat. I hope, Andreas, can you share?
Yep. Sure.
And then, because I'd really like to talk to you about that, and feel free to drop me an email, and I'd love to work with you on that, because there are definitely opportunities that we could take advantage of.
Great. And then just one thing to add to that too, I'll just plug the fact that Watershed Consulting right now is in process of developing a bioengineering manual for the lakeshore through a project funded by the Vermont DEC. And so that's hopefully going to be available, within the next several months. And that's going to be hopefully a really good resource. We really tried to have it be, something that people can understand, but actually also include a lot of technical resources in there for homeowners to be able to stabilize the lakeshore. So, be looking for that, I would say, 6 months down the road. Okay. So next question, how many red sites were identified along the shoreline? Only 3 are targeted in this project. I'm not sure, Kara, if you know that offhand.
I don't know the number offhand, but what I showed was just a very small clip of the area, just because the shoreline is so long, it's hard to see without zooming into a particular area. But if you're interested in, seeing some of those areas, I would encourage you to send Kent an email, and we could send you more information about how that was done. And I would also definitely recommend attending the second meeting on the 22nd if possible, because that's when we're really going to dive into the specific projects and all the sites that we assessed.
And then one more from Amanda Holland. You've noted that there were 44 areas identified for buffers in the NOMO, 34 shoreline assessments completed, and that the design work will be located on municipal right-of-way. Do the highest priority areas align with the municipal right-of-way, or are there high priority areas located along the shoreline on private property?
So the way that we looked at these sites, we looked at them sort of separately. So the shoreline assessments were ranked just in order of the shoreline assessments and not in combination with the more structural best management practices, which were identified in the town right of way and on, town property. So I don't really have an exact answer for that question since they weren't ranked together, but they're also very different problems with their very different solutions. And so ranking them together, didn't really make a lot of sense, given the really different parameters for each of the sites that we were looking at. And so working with Kent and friends, the hope is that those shoreline assessments could be used to help target outreach to those private property owners along the lake shore. And I'm sure no one really wants their yard to be eroding into the lake. So hopefully by, ranking those sites and providing friends with an organized list of the highest priority areas along the shoreline, they can help to get that information to the people who need it the most.
Great. And then we have, looks like one more question here. Does the Georgia shoreline extend the entire shore from Milton to St. Albans?
Yes.
No. It's 7 miles long. It's a significant stretch along the St. Albans Bay.
Another question just popped up here. There are generally setbacks from infiltration systems and wastewater systems. Will projects take this into account? I would say absolutely. That
Yes.
we're pretty focused on looking at feasibility issues like this, and pretty comfortable with that. And it's kind of a part of our priority assessment. So definitely we'll be taking all those feasibility questions into consideration. Yes.
See, this is what Friends is trying to provide to the town. This way we were able to get this EPA grant through Lake Champlain Basin Program, and we're able to bring the engineers to the site and work rather than the Georgia residents having to hire the engineers to do it. So we've tried to get out ahead of it, to the benefit of the town. We did the same thing with the stormwater management plan 12 years ago, and we worked with the road foreman over the years on some areas that the road foreman, they know where the problem areas are. We've already had 2 meetings with Georgia, with the town administrator and the road foreman, and they've had a big hand in guiding us, to look at certain areas. And then like next in a month, then we're going to invite you in as citizens and residents and try to get the same advice for you that they've given us. And so that's how we're trying to provide value to the community this way.
Great. Any other questions from anybody? Any last words, Kent or Carrie or Pat?
Just wanted to thank everyone for joining us and hope that many will join our next meeting where we can really dive into some of these specific sites.
Yeah, I've just got a little idea on closing. We really hope that you have a good understanding of the work that's happened so far now, and that you'll plan to join us again on the evening of Thursday, April 22nd, to provide us with comment on specific locations on the Georgia Shore Road to help focus our 30% design construction projects. And do feel free to contact me if you'd like to have me and Pat come down and walk the property with you, give you a personal explanation of what we're doing. We're happy to do so.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks and good night.
Have a good
Bye.
evening.